Now, if you're like me and you're still playing Elden Ring, trying to find new ways to enjoy the game, creating different builds, using maybe different weapons that you haven't used before, today I'm going to be showing you my top 5 most fun while still being incredibly overpowered weapons for you to replay the game, have an absolute blast with it whilst we're waiting for that juicy DLC to drop. And of course, you guys are freaking amazing and we're getting ever so closer to that 10,000 subscriber mark. However, there's still a bunch of you that aren't subscribed and are watching the videos, so if that's you, make sure it's not you and join the existing legends that have subscribed to this channel and be one of the first 10,000 to ever do that and make history. And now that you've done that and hit that subscribe button, let's jump straight into these weapons. Starting off at the number 5 spot, we've got the Wing of Astel. Now, we did cover this fairly recently in another video, obviously going into the most detail possible to make this the most overpowered weapon. Although it hits like an absolute truck, it is also really fun and satisfying to use, especially when you dual wield them. The Wing of Astel obviously has somewhat of a unique Ash of War, only sharing it with the Bastard Stars, which is the Nebula Ash of War, which causes a little bit of a Cosmo effect in front of you, and explosions happen within quick succession in different areas in that nebula, causing hundreds and thousands of damage with each explosion. It's one of those weapons that you can physically go and get really early on in the game if you want to, if you start Rani's quest, but it is incredibly fun to use, trying to get the timing right to have all of the explosions deal damage to your enemies. It's one of those weapons that you need to sort of learn to perfect in order to get the absolute best damage output with it. I personally am still using it and haven't perfected it just yet, but even in a PvP situation, it can be advantageous to use the Ash of War where those explosions happen sporadically, so you can catch people out and deal damage, stun lock them with this Ash of War. So even if you're using it for PvP, it can be a lot of fun to try and master it and just rinse your opponents with the Nebula. But if you are just playing for the story like me and trying to find a cool way to defeat bosses and enjoy the game over and over again, the Wing of Astel is more than happy to carry you through any new game plus. And like I say, when you dual wield them, you've also got the double curve sword abilities with the quick attacks, hitting the enemies with a flurry of attacks, and then if you need to revert back to the Nebula, you can just pull that out in an instant. So I feel like the Wing of Astel is a good weapon to start this off, as you feel like an absolute boss just pulling the power of the cosmos out from your hands, and you could obviously have a whole bunch of fun making this into some sort of intelligence build, some sorcerer's build with the gravitational spells, and just building a character arc around gravity and the stars and everything like that. So if that's something that you're into, then the Wing of Astel is probably the best pick for you. But if you're more into being one of the most powerful samurais that there is in existence, then the number 4 spot is probably more tailored to you. That's because at number 4 we've got the Eleonoras pole blade, and yes, I know I bang on about this weapon a whole lot. I couldn't do a top 5 without it, some say, but that's because it genuinely is so much fun to use. Much like the Wing of Astel, it's one of those weapons that you need to sort of practice to learn all of the movesets, all of the power stancing with it. If you want to dual wield it, you can. And again, the unique Ash of War just turns you into some blood-curdling samurai, twisting around like a helicopter, slicing your enemies up like a loaf of bread. It genuinely deals so much damage, and it's always so cool when using this weapon. Not only does the Ash of War obviously turn you into some sort of Beyblade, but if you have the heavy attack, you also do this rolling spin attack, dealing again about 4 or 5 hits in quick succession. And with it being a bleed weapon, and bleed being such a crutch thing in Elden Ring, this can obviously turn it into an absolute powerhouse. The weapon itself is also obtained from one of like the coolest mysterious characters that you meet in Elden Ring, obviously being Yura and completing his quest, where you take on all sorts of different bloody fingers that are invading your game, and then at the very end you defeat the last of them, Eleonora, allowing you to ravish the lands between, acting out Yura's revenge and obliterating everything that stands in your path with this weapon. So again, if you want a character arc that's all about redemption and being a jacked up samurai, Eleonora's pole blade is definitely a weapon that you should be using. And obviously turning up the juice and getting into the top 3 now, it was a bit of a hard choice, I'm not going to lie. However, at the 3rd spot in this list, we've got the Malkiths Black Blade. And for those of you that are fans of sort of like the Shadow Realm or Destined Death, anything with that sort of characteristic, this weapon is incredibly fun to use. You can cheat a little bit and also use the Black Knife alongside Malkiths Blade, just so you got both types of Destined Death abilities to you. So you got the black knife with the black blade, and then Malkiths Destined Death Ash of War as well, taking health away from your enemies and taking 10% of their health from their health bar so they can't regen it. Can almost turn this build into an absolute troll build, taking as much health away from the opponents as physically possible. But also the damage output with this weapon is incredible. I should hopefully have the gameplay going on in the background with Placidusax, and if you get it right, I was literally taking away half his health in seconds just by using the Ash of War. So not only is this a really fun weapon to use, and obviously making a character around Destined Death possibly from the depths of hell if you want to go that far, but it really is an absolute monster of a weapon if you tailor it correctly and get the right build around it. It's actually quite satisfying just seeing your enemy's health bar over time deteriorate. I would say if you haven't given time to any Destined Death abilities in the game, whether it be the Black Knife or Malkiths Black Blade, definitely try and put a build around Malkiths Black Blade, have some different incantations maybe mixed in as well, but this weapon itself can become incredibly fun to use. It's mainly a strength weapon as well, so if you don't even want to use the Ash of War, it's incredibly useful for just being somewhat of a caveman build as well. So realistically, you can do two builds in one. You could be a caveman that's just stumbled upon this amazing ancient sword and you're just going to smack your enemies around the head with it, or you could choose obviously to use the exact powers that it possesses and have an absolute blast with it. So that's why for me it sits at number 3. But of course, the top 2. What are the most fun weapons to use in the game? Again, this is a weapon that we covered fairly recently. Well, actually both of them are ones that we've covered fairly recently in the past month or so. But at number 2, we're going to have the Moon Veil. So pretty much everything that I was saying about the Eleonoras pole blade then gets ramped up even further with the Moon Veil. Again, it's a weapon that you can get incredibly quickly just by heading over to Caelid and defeating the mini boss in the Gale Tunnel. And then once you do have access to it, you've got access to one of the most powerful katanas in the entire game. This katana possesses moonlight magic and allows you to hit enemies at range with 2 different strikes, whether it be a swipe across with the katana once it's sheathed, and then also a swipe downwards, doing incredible amounts of damage. But it also keeps its origin of being a katana and has the ability to apply bleed to each of those attacks. So as I was mentioning earlier about being some incredible samurai, well, now we're amping it up by also infusing it with magic. You could play this character looking just like an ordinary samurai, but then when you pull out this sword, your enemies are going to be running away, knowing that you've got an absolute demon of a katana wielded in your hands. I know for me, this is the most fun that I've had using katanas. It does more damage than the pole blade and moves a bit quicker in terms of chaining attacks and is a lot more useful in PvP. So that's why obviously it's higher in the list compared to the pole blade. But if you wanted to say fuse a mage build and a samurai build and play the characteristic that you're a samurai that's found like the ultimate powers and sorceries that there are to find in the lands between, you can go and do that with this weapon. This weapon also benefits from things like Terra Magica, so you are actually going to be able to boost it with spells and other incantations, anything like that. So it is actually viable to make a mage build whilst also carrying the Moon Veil, which is obviously brilliant for the adaptation with this weapon into multiple builds. So if you are running a mage build and you thought, I really wish I had like a weapon that could also just deal incredible amounts of damage and make it more fun so I'm not just spamming Comet Azure 24/7, then the Moon Veil is your answer for that. But of course, that just leaves us with the top spot. As much as all of these weapons are extremely fun to use, there is one that just pips them all. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, is one that we've covered recently as well, that being the Dark Moon Greatsword. Going back and using this weapon for the video that we made about a month ago was possibly the most fun that I've had using a weapon in Elden Ring for quite some time. I'm not gonna lie, I was one of those people that slept on it at the very beginning when the game first released because I was too busy using bleed weapons or faith builds and using dragon incantations. Yeah, the Dark Moon Greatsword was nowhere to be seen. But since then, this weapon has very quickly grown on me and become one of my favourite weapons to use in the entire game. Because once you use the Ash of War and infuse your weapon with that magic, the heavy attacks turn into essentially another sort of wave of ice magic damage that just obliterates enemies if they're in your way. The weapon itself just looks amazing. Obviously it always has done, as it's the latest iteration of the Moonlight Greatsword in all of the From Software games. They've always looked really cool, but for me this one in Elden Ring looks exceptionally cool, and it truly makes you feel feel incredible, like you've got the power of the gods at your hands. Of course, with this weapon you need to complete Rani's questline and obviously continue on being Rani's disciple and spreading her influence across the lands between and just obliterate everything with this weapon. For me, it's one of the strongest weapons in the game, and again, much like the Malkith blade, where it's a great sword, even if you don't want to use the godly powers that it possesses for some reason, you can also just go around bonking enemies' heads with it, and it still does quite a considerable amount of damage. But realistically, who doesn't want the powers of the Moonlight at their fingertips, dealing extra frost damage and just giving literally no chance to the enemies that stand in front of you? It genuinely is that good. And of course, as with I think all of these weapons actually, we have got videos on the channel basically going into much more detail about the weapon specifically, so I will have all of those videos linked in the description down below for you. So if there was a particular weapon that you've seen in this list and you wanted to know how to optimize it the best, check out the description down below because you'll have access to all of those videos, and that way you can have the most fun with each weapon that we've discussed today. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this list. Like I said earlier, if there's some weapons on here that maybe you feel shouldn't be on here or something should be on here instead of a different weapon, do obviously let me know in the comments down below. It'd be really interesting to know what you guys use and if you use any of these weapons at all, because I'm sure probably some of you have used these weapons in the past or are still using these weapons to this day. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to know what you're running. But of course, that's pretty much everything for this video. Thank you again so much for watching. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you're having an amazing day, and I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.